I'm Amy Lentz, and I am the alumni director for University of Idaho. My special guest today is Kenton Bird, and he is a graduate of University of Idaho and alum from 1976. He recently retired in December of 2023, and he's currently a professor emeritus with the School of Journalism and Mass Media. And he was the director of the school from 2003 to 2015, and U of I's director for general education from 2015 to 2017. He's been very active in faculty governance, and he's chaired the faculty senate from 2012 to 2013. He's had a fantastic career. As I mentioned, he graduated in 1976, and he was became the editor of the Argonaut. We're so happy we still have the Argonaut with us as well. He later completed his master's in journalism history from the University College in Cardiff, Wales, and a PhD in American Studies from Washington State University. So he's a man of the Palouse. Before beginning his academic career, he was a reporter and editor of newspapers in all our wonderful, beautiful towns in North Idaho: Moscow, Lewiston, Sandpoint, Kellogg, and he even had a summer internship at the Washington Post. And before joining the U of I faculty in 1999, he taught for 3 years at Colorado State University. I definitely want to mention too, as a congressional fellow of the American Political Science Association, he worked as a congressional staff member in Washington, D.C. And he is also the co-author and new biography of former House Speaker Tom Foley, The Man in the Middle. So we probably will get to talk a little bit about that as well, which was published in 2023. So we are going to jump right in, Kenton, if you're good with that. I have to start with Kellogg. I grew up in a small town, Orofino, Idaho. Yes, I'm a maniac, but I know you also grew up in Kellogg. So when and why did you decide to attend the University of Idaho?
Before there was a Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival at the University of Idaho, there was something called the Solo and Ensemble Festival, which took place every spring on the U of I campus. I was a music student in Kellogg, and starting in 9th grade through my senior year of high school, I came to Moscow every April to play my French horn and play with various ensembles, sing in a men's choir. And I was exposed to the School of Music. And for a time, I thought I might want to be a music major. But the value of that experience was exposing me to this beautiful campus, the community of Moscow. We actually stayed in the Moscow Hotel when it was still a hotel. And I grew comfortable with the place. I knew my way around. I knew what was then the sub, knew the administration building and the music building. And so by the fall of my senior year, I wasn't seriously considering any other place except the University of Idaho. But the other factor was that 3 of my favorite teachers at Kellogg High School had attended the University of Idaho, and they pushed me into considering it. One was a social studies teacher, one was our marvelous band and choir director, and one was an English teacher who taught journalism and advised the student newspaper.
I am glad they were all looking out for the University of Idaho and had some influence there. So what attracted you? You were in music, but then obviously you took a turn and went for journalism. So tell us
by my senior year, I was the editor of the Kellogg High School newspaper called The Wildcat. And I liked the reporting, the writing, the editing, but I liked the camaraderie that we had developed on the staff. And by the summer after my senior year of high school, I was working for the hometown paper, the Kellogg Evening News, and had contact with a number of visiting journalists. Came through Kellogg that summer, a number of political candidates, and one of my mentors later on, Jay Shellady, was working for a U.S. Senate candidate. He said, "You're going to U of I, you've got to get involved in the Argonaut." And by the time I had arrived in Moscow in the fall of 1972, I declared journalism as a major and never looked back.
That's great that you were so confident in what you wanted to do so early on. That's not always the case with a lot of people. So as a student, what really stood out, Kenton? Tell us a few stories. Who were your mentors? What stood out when you were a student?
Well, I was lucky to fall into what was then a pretty small department of journalism with 2 full-time faculty and a couple of part-timers. The head of the department was Professor Bert Cross, who had been at the University of Idaho since 1962. His colleague was Jim Van Leuven, and together they took me under their wings, adding to my opportunities at the U of I. Was the managing editor of the what's now the Moscow Poma Daily News, then called the Idahonian, Ted Stanton. And Ted taught a class each semester, and he was a great mentor and gave me my first job after I graduated from the U of I. But I have to say that in addition to the classroom study of journalism, I spent an awful lot of time at the Argonaut. And the person who got me in the door at the Argonaut the second semester of my freshman year was Rod Grammer, who was the editor for 2 semesters and has been a friend ever since. And the time at the Argonaut really reinforced what I was learning in the classroom. Beyond that, I'd like to say I got a great liberal education in the classic sense of the word through classes in history and political science and economics and sociology. I took a calculus class. I took a French literature and translation class, and so was able to really expose myself to a lot of ideas. So it was not just learning how to report and write, but learning that there's a big world out there beyond what had been my limited vision of growing up in Kellogg and then expanding quite a bit coming to Moscow, but then having the opportunity to take classes outside my major made a big difference in where I went after I graduated.
Kenton, did you live on campus or off campus?
I lived for 2 years in Graham Hall in the Wallace Complex. And then starting in my junior year, I like to say I lived at the Argonaut. I don't think I spent more than a couple of late nights there and then slept on the couches in the Argonaut office. And then, but I did move off campus for my last 2 years and lived in a house over near the Troy Highway.
So besides the couch of the Argonaut, did you have any other hangout places that you had when you were a student?
Well, the old sub, now the Bruce Pittman Center, had a cafe called the Blue Bucket. So spent a lot of time there. And of course, when I arrived at the University of Idaho, the drinking age was 19. I turned 19 in the second semester of my freshman year. And so like a lot of my friends who are in the conversation today, we've frequented places like the Garden Lounge, the Billiard Den, and the Spruce Tavern.
I do remember some of those places. So you worked as a daily newspaper reporter and editor for 15 years before beginning a teaching career. So how did your professional background inform your teaching?
Well, it was an easy transition from the Argonaut because the Argonaut really did a lot for my career and for many of those who worked with me and who followed me. The opportunity to make your own decisions, to make your own mistakes, to produce news stories on deadline, to interact with news sources and engage with readers. That was all part of my Argonaut experience. So when I slid over to the Idahonian downtown, I didn't miss a beat. I started initially part-time, 3 days a week, and then switched to full-time the last semester of my senior year. So as a journalist, I worked in a variety of roles. I covered sports for the Lewiston Tribune. I was a stringer who covered a variety of news in Moscow and Pullman before I graduated. And I just learned the wide variety of news stories that our little region of Moscow, Pullman, and the Palouse had. So when I started teaching journalism, actually part-time in 1979, when Bernie Wilson was one of my students, I taught a public affairs reporting class, and essentially the students in the class did what I did as a reporter. We covered public meetings, we went to court cases, we interviewed elected officials, we wrote personality profiles. So it was an easy transition, at least at that level, to teach the reporting and editing skills classes.
And so you also worked in several capacities at U of I, going back to 1979, as a lecturer in the School of Journalism. What are some of the most significant changes you've seen at the university over the years?
I think what surprises me most is that how few changes there have been. That there's still that sense of being the Ivy League of the Northwest. I still get a thrill when I walk up the Hello Walk and see the clock tower of the administration building. So the fact that we've been able to preserve so many of those historic buildings at the campus core, and the word is eluding me, that the camaraderie, the companionship, the opportunity to be part of a collaborative team of learners and to be a student, even as a faculty member, were all things that have been consistent. Now, the physical plant has changed, that around the edges. And I love the Student Rec Center. I think that's a great addition to the campus. I love the iSub, formerly known as the Commons, and the interaction between the classrooms in the TLC with the food court and the meeting spaces next door. I enjoy the IRIC, the Integrated Research and Innovation Center, is a great place for meetings and conferences. So I think that the people in charge of campus planning have done a great job of preserving all of the qualities that made the campus so distinctive and attractive when I was a high school student looking for a place to go to college, while around the edges bringing in the newer buildings that provide additional teaching, learning, and spaces for research and creative activity. I have to say that the music building, which was probably the first place that I visited on campus, is pretty much the same as it was 50 plus years ago, with the exception of the wonderful renovation of the recital hall, now known as Haddock Hall, where I was just yesterday to hear the Palouse Jazz Project give a preview of this year's Jazz Festival.
Oh gosh, wow, so many great memories that you're sharing. So you came to U of I as a full-time faculty member. What activities as a faculty member have you found to be the most rewarding?
Oh gosh, I have been so lucky to have participated in a number of faculty enrichment activities. In 2002, 2003, I was selected as a humanities fellow by Dean Kurt Olson in College of Letters and Sciences at the time, to work with two outstanding colleagues, Rodney Fry from anthropology and Mary Dupree from the School of Music. And we put together a 10-month faculty enrichment program called Sense of Place in the Pacific Northwest. And I worked with 30 faculty members from across the university, and we did field trips that we call rolling seminars. We engaged with speakers on campus, and I've made lifelong friends with some of the people who were part of that cohort of humanities fellows. 12 years ago, Dan Buckvich from the School of Music invited me to become co-coordinator of the Malcolm Renfrew interdisciplinary colloquium, which had begun in 2001. And I'd been a regular attendee of the Tuesday colloquium series, and Dan had worked initially with Rick Fehrenbacher and Michael O'Rourke. And when Michael left for a job in the Midwest, Dan asked if I wanted to come on board as part of the planning team. And for those of you outside Moscow, the Renfrew Colloquium is really a celebration of the University of Idaho's intellectual life. It features every week faculty members and graduate students and postdocs, and sometimes a visiting scholar dropping in to talk about teaching, research, outreach, and it is such a thrill. It's like choreographing a semester-long dinner party, and you want just the right mix of guests. And so one week it's a philosopher, and the next week it's a physicist, and then you've got somebody from ag econ, and then you go back to music, and it's really has been the highlight of my time the last few years. So those are between the humanities fellows and the Renfrew Colloquium, things that don't have a lot to do with journalism per se, but help raise our eyebrows and expose us to ideas and help us learn about new and different things, which is what a university is all about.
I absolutely love going to that. I look forward to the Renfrew Colloquium every week. It's just, I've learned so much every time I go to one of those. So kudos to you and all those really amazing legacies that you've left the University of Idaho. Want to kind of transition and jump over to one of your latest endeavors, and that is co-authoring The Man in the Middle, which is the biography of the former House Speaker Tom Foley. First, what got you interested in telling this story?
You mentioned my time in Washington, D.C. as a congressional fellow of American Political Science Association. That's a great program designed to help new journalists and mid-career reporters, as well as political scientists, better understand Capitol Hill from the inside. And I was encouraged to apply by one of my faculty mentors at the U of I, Al Rouillet from political science, said, hey, here's something you ought to check out. And I applied and was selected and spent 11 months in Washington, D.C. Half of my time was on the House of Representatives side, working for Lee Hamilton, congressman from Indiana. Other half was on the Senate side, working for Tim Wirth, a senator from Colorado. And Lee Hamilton, it turns out, was in the same congressional class as Tom Foley. In fact, was elected the same year, and they were longtime friends. And so through Lee Hamilton, I took an interest in what was happening in the House leadership in the spring of 1989. I had the good fortune of being in the House Visitor Gallery on the evening in May 1989 when the previous Speaker of the House resigned, Jim Wright of Texas. It was fortunate for me, unfortunate for him, but it meant that Tom Foley, who was then the majority leader of the House, was poised to become the Speaker. And so I had that sort of firsthand witness to history at the time. After my congressional fellowship, I returned to the Idahonian for a little more than 2 years, and then realized that what I really wanted to do was write about American history and politics in a larger way, to do more than just news stories and editorials, but to step back and provide some historical and political context. So I wrote my PhD dissertation at Washington State University and was focused on Tom Foley's congressional career. And I was writing that, it was not contemporaneous, but it was very recent. It was in the, Foley was defeated in 1994 and gave up the speakership after 6 years. So I was writing between 1995 and 1999 about that time in Congress. So fast forward almost 20 years, and I'm approached by one of my PhD committee members from Washington State, John Pierce, who, like me, had been a congressional fellow. His time was a decade earlier. John had been approached by University Press of Kansas about writing a book for a series on congressional leaders. John said, I'd like to do it, but I want to bring in my former graduate student as a co-author. And we were a great partnership. I had the journalism and historical background. John had the analytical framework of a political scientist. So that's what led us to the book that was published in July of 2023. And I have loved the opportunity to talk about Tom Foley and his congressional career since the book has come out. So don't let me ramble on too long about Tom Foley.
I definitely want to put that on my list of books to read. Was there anything that really surprised you in doing the research on Tom Foley that you might want to share?
Tom Foley was not only brilliant, but he was so diplomatic. He had such great people skills, which made him such a successful leader. The subtitle of our book is The Man in the Middle, because Tom Foley was able to work within the very diverse Democratic caucus, but he was also able to work with Republican presidents like Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, and across the aisle with Republican leaders almost throughout his congressional career. So he really was a remarkable model of diplomacy, of thoughtfulness, of compromise, but without backing away from his own principles. He held firm on a lot of issues, but he really represented a time when the House of Representatives was a working legislative body, unlike today. I hold him up as a model of leadership, and wish that our leaders in the House today would take a page from Tom Foley's playbook.
What do you think, Tom, and this question was very timely. What do you think Tom Foley thinks about the current state of the U.S. House of Representatives now?
When Tom Foley was defeated in 1994, the Republicans took over the majority of the House of Representatives. And my measured opinion from the perspective of somebody who knew and wrote a lot about him is he would not have been happy in the minority. The Congress became increasingly polarized over the past really 30 years from 1994 to the present. That's made it increasingly difficult for the two parties to to work together on legislation. A lot have to do with the personalities, but also with some rules that the Republican Party and the House have adopted about when and how something will come to the floor. And we're seeing that played out this week with the debate over in the House over aid to Ukraine and to Israel. Just the parliamentary obstacles that the Republican conference is using to keep something that is supported by a majority of the House as a whole from coming to a vote. So I think he would be very frustrated. I think he would just shake his head in dismay as he watched the actions of Congress. I will say that after he left the House, Tom Foley continued to be a very distinguished public servant, and he served 5 years as the U.S. ambassador to Japan and served with honor. So he didn't run away from public life after he left Congress, but found another way to serve his country.
Well, before we leave the discussion of politics, we do have a question from John Shea that I think is really worth repeating here. He says that his time at U of I closely overlapped yours, and can you give some perspective on the shift in Idaho politics and what the U of I can do to help bring balance and perspective today? He goes on to say Idaho is a conservative state, but in your career, you saw Democratic governors and senators achieve a lot of success.
And over my time as a working journalist, I was able to interview Cecil Andrus on multiple occasions, John Evans, Frank Church, Jim McClure, a Republican who had a great working relationship with Frank Church in the Senate. So I got some insights into the true greats of Idaho politics of the second half of the 20th century. My friend Randy Staples, who is a longtime political observer and writes a weekly column, probably has a better grasp of the changes in Idaho politics than I do. But I'll say three things are responsible for this shift to the right. One is in-migration to Idaho from other states, particularly more conservative states, and that's reflected nationally in sort of self-selection. People are sorting themselves by party. They're moving to places where there are more people who have similar views, and Idaho has been no exception. The other thing that has happened is that there doesn't seem to be the type of leaders that we had in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that are able to really reach voters across party lines. I mean, Cecil Andrus and Frank Church both got elected and reelected with a lot of Republican votes and lots of independents. And as the nation has become polarized, so too has Idaho, and that there's more clustering within the parties and fewer opportunities for crossing over. I think the other thing that has made a difference is that national issues have become state issues. Tip O'Neill, a former Speaker of the House, once said all politics is local. And in fact, today, all politics is national. And so on issues like foreign aid, defense policy, reproductive rights, climate change, and energy policy, there's less room for policy entrepreneurs at the state level and more adherence to what is the national party saying about this and how do I align with that. So all those, and a great question, John, about how Idaho has become more polarized, and it's become much more difficult to elect Democrats.
Switching gears a little bit, in the field of journalism and mass media, it continues to change at an unprecedented rate. So what are jam students today learning at U of I that will serve them serve them throughout their careers?
The fundamental things still apply, to quote the song, as time goes by. The fundamentals of journalism remain unchanged. The importance of accurate reporting, of concise and complete writing. The nature of the business is we are storytellers, and it doesn't matter what the medium is, whether it's whether I'm reading the newspaper in print or reading it online. So it's not the outlet or the platform that matters as much as the content. And so in all of our journalism classes at U of I, we emphasize interviewing, library research, using the internet as a reporting tool, the importance of communicating clearly with multiple audiences, so tailoring your particular content to the readers or viewers. And I think the media, the principles that I learned from Bert Cross 48 years ago for media law, ethical practice of journalism, respect for your audiences, those are all consistent as part of our journalism and mass media training, because we have so many crossovers now that weren't apparent when I was a student. And the advertising majors did this, the radio TV majors did this, and the journalism majors did this. And now it's all integrated. And so within the School of Journalism and Mass Media, students work together in interdisciplinary teams. Our advertising competition team often has a journalist on the team. We've got videographers, we've got sound editors, and it's really more of a school of integrated media than it is a school of journalism, just because of those multiple skills. I will say that I may remain fond of the journalism major because of its great flexibility, the ability to specialize as a political reporter by taking political science classes, or to prepare yourself to become a foreign correspondent by having a second major in international studies and maybe picking up French or Spanish or Japanese or Chinese or German. So at the heart, I see journalism as the gateway degree, but there are great skills being taught in our other majors. We have really tried to keep up with technology and new platforms for presenting and distributing news. Any of our alumni who had spent some time in the KUID TV studio would be amazed to see how that studio looks today. I was in last week with a group of visiting Native American journalists, and we were talking about how the free press applies to various Native American tribes. But as I looked around the studio, I saw the ghosts of past reporters and producers, people like Mike Kirk, who got his broadcasting start at KUID, or Peter Haggart, who was the longtime station manager and really kept things running during the late 80s and early 90s. So we continue to emphasize the fundamentals even as we explore new technologies.
Wonderful. Boy, you're firing up some questions here. There's some definite questions coming in on this conversation right now. So wanted to get to some of those. So what are your thoughts on the state of the daily print newspapers in the US today? For example, they cited, the Lewiston Tribune's down to 6 days. Some have gone out of business completely. And it is concerning to many who do like their newspapers and like to get that news. Any thoughts on that?
Print newspapers in this country have had a double whammy, or maybe a triple whammy. I think the change in retailing in this country from so-called bricks and mortar stores to online retailing has hurt the Main Street merchants and the mall merchants who were the bread and butter of advertising for print newspapers, not just in Idaho, but all over the country. So the loss of advertising revenue is one factor. The shift in the way people access news and information that we have turned to our tablets and our phones to be able to get news. And so for many of our students today, getting news from a printed publication is something their grandparents did. That it is in many ways faster, it's more convenient. You don't have to wait for the print newspaper to be delivered to your porch, and or if you're lucky, it's delivered to your porch. If not, you're out in the flower bed or on the front sidewalk, bringing it in out of the rain. And finally, the COVID-19 pandemic had a huge impact on newspapers, especially advertisers, and the way that people needed information right away about the epidemic, about vaccines, about treatments. And I think the print newspaper just was not quick enough and direct enough. So it's really over the past 25 years with those three developments: the rise of online retailing, the decision of people to seek news in other places, and the after effects of the pandemic. So I shed a tear every time I read about a newspaper cutting its print edition or going exclusively online, or a newspaper merging or closing. And just last week, the Moscow Pullman Daily News, where I cut my teeth as a daily journalist, announced that it's going to a hybrid model with online news 7 days a week, but print editions only 2 days a week, Thursday and Saturday. Fingers crossed that the Lewiston Tribune keeps the 6 day a week publication in print, because I'm a subscriber to both, and I really enjoy the aesthetic experience, but also the ways that print newspapers connect with readers in ways that online publications don't. So
on the social media side, Kenton, we have a question from somebody that asked, where can you look on the social media side for your style of journalism? Is there any advice or tips there?
I like a lot of online news sites. I am a regular reader of the New York Times online, thanks to the University of Idaho's libraries partnership with the New York Times. I look at the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal quite often online, LA Times, Seattle Times for regional news. But it's interesting that I get a lot of my leads or the information about a story that's been reported nationally or regionally from Facebook. Where it's become a featured post that it's part of my news feed, and because I keep going back to those sites, I keep getting a post from that publication. So it's not Facebook per se, but it's Facebook as a bulletin board where these other publications are posting. NPR does that. PBS NewsHour, so it's a catalog of what's available out there. I must.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Austin.
I just wanted to confess that since Twitter became X, I have not paid much attention to Twitter, but I do use Facebook as a source and a link to news from other parts of the country and other parts of the world.
A couple of your listeners here made a couple comments. They mentioned Epic Times and wondered if you ever read that. But I also we also have a note that Idaho Capital Sun and Idaho Education News are both available free of charge on online as well. So.
And I should give a shout out to both of those publications. They're not printed outlets, but they're online, and they're part of my daily media diet too. That Idaho Capital Sun was founded by a University of Idaho graduate, former Argonaut editor Christina Lords, who I'm proud to say was one of my advisees when I taught at the U of I. And several staff members from the Idaho Education News similarly had U of I training. I have read Epoch Times when it was a print publication, and it would occasionally show up on those racks of free newspapers, but I haven't paid much attention to it since there's no longer a print edition available locally.
We can't leave this topic without this question. We had one from one of your listeners here on fake news, and I think it also ties to another question here about artificial intelligence. How can you discern that? How and what advice might go to students as they're grasping for solutions to these?
This is a huge challenge for not just news organizations, but for readers and viewers to sort out the wheat from the chaff, and the legitimate news from the propaganda and the artificially generated content that is posing as news. The University of Idaho Library has some great resources online about finding facts online. If I were to rewrite the University of Idaho curriculum, I would include a required first-year class on information literacy that would help students sort through the variety of sources available, and to be able to learn those distinguishing characteristics that help give a clue that something is not what it seems. But the artificial intelligence, the use of deep fakes for voices, for images, for video, are making this increasingly more difficult. And in an election year, it's especially perilous to have this much content out there. I might mention that one of our signature programs in the School of Journalism and Mass Media is the Oppenheimer Ethics Symposium, supported by a couple of U of I alums, Doug and Skip Oppenheimer of Boise. And our program last year was on political information, misinformation, and disinformation, and featured a speaker from PolitiFact, which is run by the Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg, Florida. That was a great opportunity for our students to see firsthand how professional fact checkers go about their business. And I give a shout out to Poynter and to PolitiFact, which is one of several fact-checking services that would help you distinguish between real news and fake news.
That was an excellent seminar. I was fortunate enough to attend that. So well done in offering that up. There are many students, some in high school, that are contemplating journalism, and they worry sometimes about the pay. They worry about many of the other challenges that we just talked about, do you have any advice to the high school student that might want to enter into journalism?
I go back to my own experience where I saw journalism as a great window to the world. It is the classic liberal arts degree that emphasizes research, writing, critical thinking, collaborative work with other students, the chance to hear from great faculty members at both within the school and outside. And with a journalism degree, you can go anywhere. You may remember the U of I had a tagline for many years that said, "From here you can go anywhere," and I think that still applies to from our university, particularly the liberal arts disciplines. There are so many opportunities to explore the world, to see different people and places, to engage with ideas at a variety of levels. And the picture that was used to promote this cup of joe was me standing outside my office on the third floor of the administration building. But what might not have been apparent was I was standing in front of a bulletin board full of hundreds of business cards of University of Idaho alumni in various media fields. And whenever a prospective student and her family comes to visit, and if I was asked, well, what can you do with a journalism degree? I can point to the bulletin board and say, look at this person, look at Rod Grammer, worked in newspapers, worked in television, and now he's in public issues advocacy in Boise. Or I'd say Jennifer Warnick started as Argonaut editor and ended up as the chief storyteller for Starbucks, and now is working for Rivian electric trucks. That I could spend 20 minutes talking about the people that have come through the University of Idaho, and that they may not have stayed in journalism their entire career, but many of them have ended up in journalistic roles in universities, in nonprofit organizations, in natural resource agencies. They've taken those marketable skills and applied them to different organizations. There's a term called the fifth estate. Journalism is traditionally thought of as the fourth estate of the realm, but the fifth estate are those people who continue to work as journalists, but maybe writing for more specialized audiences or writing for internal audiences rather than external audiences. So if there are any parents of prospective students in the audience, or alums who would like to pursue this question a little further, I'm glad to talk about the versatility of the journalism degree as a starting point for some really wonderful careers.
That's great. So we definitely, what's ringing true is how important you feel that the humanities are in what we do. And you are on the board, as I understand, of the Idaho Humanities Council. So can you share a little bit of what that means to you and what the importance is of the humanities?
The Idaho Humanities Council is the statewide affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the IHC, as it's known, celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2023. So it has a long legacy in the state. And reading the list of past board members is like a who's who of politics and the arts and literature and public issues in Idaho. It's really a remarkable tradition that I feel honored to be part of. What has made the Idaho Humanities Council such a strong force in Idaho has been its ability to fund and support and encourage programs in the smallest communities of Idaho. It's just a thrill to look at these applications twice a year now, and to read about how a small grant from IHC supports things like the Malad Welsh Festival. Who knew that there was a Welsh community in Malad in southeast Idaho, or the Trailing of the Sheep Festival in Ketchum, or various events associated with the common reading programs that many libraries around the state support. So this statewide research and outreach has really made a difference, and is one of my favorite parts of being on the council, is to read these heartfelt applications and then to hear the progress reports after the fact of how this event reached 250 people, and that they have continued a conversation about an important public issue, or they've given visibility to a sometimes overlooked community group through the humanities program. So it's a great opportunity, and we're coming up on Idaho Gives, and I know the University of Idaho will be making a pitch to alumni for contributions to departments and colleges and the Alumni Association. But I would also encourage our viewers today to consider a gift to Idaho Humanities Council.
Yeah, it's a fantastic organization. I can't say enough about it. And I know that they often have authors that travel across the country, across Idaho, and it's the terrific events that they offer up to. So good job on the plug for the Idaho Humanities Council for sure. I know we're getting up to time. Boy, we could go on forever, Kenton. But there's a lot of questions about your retirement. What are you going to do? You've been such a busy person. This is just, you don't seem like you're retired to me. I still get to see you. And but what are you and your wife are going to do during your retirement here?
Well, I'm chuckling because I'm telling people that so far I'm failing at retirement. I committed to coordinate this year's Oppenheimer Ethics Symposium, just because I believe in it and I wanted to see it happen, and I wanted to go out on a high note. So even though I officially retired in December, I committed to coordinate the symposium this spring, and that happened last week. I have put together a succession plan for the Malcolm Renfrew Colloquium, which is I didn't want to see it fade away either, and I think we've got a great team and a plan in place, and are already soliciting proposals for next year. We have, if you're in Moscow, we have programs the next 3 Tuesdays, and you can see the schedule on the U of I events calendar. I have spent most of the last 2.5 weeks sorting through the archaeological site formerly known as my office on the 3rd floor of the administration building. And I have correspondence with a lot of people who are on this call today, but it's really heartrending to go heartwarming to look at letters and photos of former students, to look at lecture notes, to look at student papers from my early years at the University of Idaho. And I have to assure everyone that anything that has identifiable student information or a grade is going to be properly shredded, consistent with FERPA regulations. So once I get out of the office, I have a clearer view of what's ahead. My wife, Jerry, and I are looking forward to some travel. I'm looking forward to playing my French horn, which was the instrument that brought me to the University of Idaho for that music festival in high school. I may revisit some of my previous writing. The question about the fate of daily printed newspapers continues to intrigue me, and there are some great family-owned independent newspapers, but there are fewer and fewer of those. Shout out to the Alfreds at the Lewiston Tribune and the Coles family in Spokane, and some of the other papers around the Northwest that have continued under family ownership and a commitment to independent local journalism. So there may be another article or presentation or even a Renfrew colloquium talk about the fate of community newspapers, especially in the Northwest.
Well, we have just a few seconds left here before I kind of close things out. Anything we didn't ask you that you wanted to share, or any way you want to close things up on your end?
Well, the fact that I have left Moscow 5 different times and have come back every time is a demonstration of what some people call the rubber band effect. That you can go so far for so long and then be snapped back. And I have to say that those first impressions of walking on campus as a high school student really spoke to me, that this is a community of learning that is now a statewide community of learning. And I have just been thrilled to have this long association with the university as a student, as an alumnus, as a faculty member and administrator, and now as an emeriti. But I'm not going anywhere. We're committed to Moscow. We love this community and are looking forward to the Jazz Festival this week.
Awesome. We are so glad that you joined us, and so many people have weighed in with notes of well wishes and happy retirements. And Kenton, it was a pleasure to have you as our guest, and you'll be receiving your official Cup of Joe mug from us, and we look forward to having opportunities to engage with you for a long time. So thank you so much.